The sound of her voice still echoes in my head sometimes. Not the sweet one from when she was little, asking me to read her favorite bedtime story one more time. No, this was different, calculated. The voice she used when she wanted something. "Mom, I know it's a lot to ask, but this baby, this one is different. We really need your help." I remember standing in my kitchen, the phone pressed against my ear, staring at the stack of bills on my counter. Bills I'd been ignoring because I'd already given her the money that was supposed to cover them. That was the moment everything shattered. The moment I finally said no. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 months earlier, to when I still believed I was doing the right thing. My name is Margaret, and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. Well, I've lived here most of my life, in the same modest house with the creaky porch swing and the lemon tree out back that refuses to die no matter how many times I forget to water it. I raised 4 kids in this house. Julia, my oldest, always had this way of making me feel needed. Maybe that was my first mistake, confusing being needed with being used. But mothers don't think that way, do we? We just give and convince ourselves it's love. The house holds so many memories. Sometimes I walk through the rooms and I can still see them all as children, running through these hallways, their laughter bouncing off the walls. Julia was always the leader, the bossy one, organizing her siblings into elaborate games. Even then, she had this talent for getting people to do what she wanted. I thought it was confidence, leadership potential. Now I wonder if I was watching manipulation develop in real time and calling it charm. My late husband, Robert, he passed away 8 years ago from a heart attack. Sudden, devastating, the kind of loss that reshapes your entire world. Julia was there for me during that time, or so I thought. She'd come over almost daily, bringing the grandkids, filling the silence with noise and life. I was grateful then. I didn't realize she was also going through my mail, making mental notes of my financial situation, calculating how much she could eventually extract from her grieving mother. 3 months before that phone call, I was sitting in that same kitchen, drinking my morning coffee when Julia stopped by. She had this glow about her, the kind pregnant women get, and I felt that familiar warmth spread through my chest. My baby was having a baby. Again. Her 5th, if you're keeping count. I wasn't, not really. Each pregnancy had blurred into the next, each one requiring just a little more help from good old Mom. "I have something to tell you," she said, settling into the chair across from me. Her husband, Derek, stood in the doorway, that sheepish smile on his face that I'd learned to recognize as trouble. "We're expecting again." I remember the metallic taste that filled my mouth like I'd bitten my tongue. 5 babies in 7 years. But I smiled, because that's what mothers do. We smile and we nod, and we reach for our checkbooks. "That's wonderful, honey," I heard myself say. The words felt hollow even then, but I pushed the feeling down, way down, where all those other uncomfortable feelings lived. Derek shifted his weight from foot to foot, avoiding my eyes. That should have been my first clue. He never could look at me directly when they were about to ask for money. "We're really excited," he said, his voice lacking any real enthusiasm. "But you know, with 4 kids already, things are tight." There it was, the setup, the gentle introduction to whatever request was coming. I'd heard this script so many times I could have written it myself. Julia reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm, her grip firm. "We were hoping maybe you could help us out a little, just until Derek's promotion comes through." Derek had been waiting for a promotion for 3 years. It wasn't coming. We all knew it wasn't coming. But this was part of the dance, the elaborate fiction we maintained that they were just temporarily struggling, that my help was a short-term bridge to their inevitable success. Phoenix in September is still brutal, and I remember the sweat trickling down my back as I stood on Julia's front porch later that week, carrying bags of maternity clothes I'd bought at Target. The house looked good from the outside. They always made sure it looked good from the outside. New siding I'd helped pay for. A landscaped yard, courtesy of my credit card. The BMW in the driveway that Derek insisted he needed for work. I stood there for a moment before ringing the doorbell, looking at that BMW. It was last year's model, sleek and black, probably worth more than my entire year's Social Security income. Derek needed it for work, he'd said. For the image, for the clients. Meanwhile, I was driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a temperamental air conditioner and a passenger door that stuck in the summer heat. Inside was different. Inside, there were toys everywhere, dishes in the sink, that particular chaos that comes with 4 kids under 7. Julia was on the couch, her feet up, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I came in. "Just put those in the bedroom, Mom. Thanks." No hug, no real gratitude, just directions. When did my daughter start treating me like hired help? I walked down the hallway, passing family photos that lined the walls. Professional photos, the kind that cost hundreds of dollars, everyone dressed in matching outfits against artfully blurred backgrounds. More money spent on image, on the appearance of a perfect family, while they claimed poverty to me. The oldest boy, Jake, was in his room playing video games on a console that definitely hadn't been purchased secondhand. He glanced up when I passed, gave me a distracted wave, then returned to his screen. The twins, Madison and Mason, were watching a movie in the playroom on a television bigger than anything I owned. The youngest, Lily, was taking a nap in her room, surrounded by more toys than any child could ever need. All of this while they struggled. All of this while they came to me every month with their hands out, tears in their eyes, talking about not being able to afford groceries. I know what you're thinking. You're screaming at me through your screen right now, aren't you? Telling me to wake up, to see what's right in front of my face. Trust me, I get it now. But back then, I was trapped in this belief that if I just gave a little more, sacrificed a little more, everything would click into place. Family is supposed to stick together. That's what my mother taught me. That's what I'd always believed. My mother, God rest her soul, she'd been the same way. Gave everything to her kids. Died with nothing to show for it except the satisfaction of knowing she'd been a good mother. I used to think that was noble. Now I wonder if it was just another form of self-destruction, wrapped up in the acceptable packaging of maternal sacrifice. The thing is, sacrifice had become my default setting. I didn't even question it anymore. When Julia called needing money for prenatal vitamins, I sent it. When she needed help with the down payment on a bigger car to fit all the kids, I emptied my savings account. When Derek lost another job, because Derek was always losing jobs, I covered their mortgage for 3 months straight. I'd stopped going to my book club because the membership fee seemed frivolous when Julia needed help. I'd canceled my vacation plans to San Diego, the one I'd been looking forward to for months, because she needed me to watch the kids while she and Derek went to Vegas for their anniversary. Their anniversary paid for with my credit card, while I sat in her messy house wiping noses and changing diapers at 63 years old. That week in Vegas still burned when I thought about it. Julia had posted photos on Facebook. Her and Derek at expensive restaurants, by the pool at some fancy resort, seeing Cirque du Soleil shows. Meanwhile, I'd been scrubbing crayon off their walls and trying to get vomit stains out of their carpet when the twins came down with a stomach bug. She'd called me once that whole week, and only to ask if I could handle things for an extra day because they were having such a good time. My back hurt all the time. My doctor said it was stress, but I knew it was from lifting grandkids and moving furniture and doing all the heavy lifting that Julia and Derek somehow couldn't manage. I'd lost weight, but not the good kind. The kind that comes from forgetting to eat because you're too busy worrying about everyone else. Dr. Patel, my primary care physician, she'd started hinting at depression in our last few appointments. "Margaret, you seem run down," she'd say, concern creasing her forehead. "Are you taking care of yourself? Are you eating properly? Getting enough rest?" How could I tell her the truth? That I was exhausted from being used, from pouring myself into a bottomless pit disguised as my daughter's need. It felt too shameful to say out loud, too pathetic to admit that I couldn't say no to my own child. The years just disappeared. One morning I woke up and realized I'd been doing this dance for almost a decade. My retirement account, the one I'd built up carefully over 30 years of working as a school secretary, had dwindled to almost nothing. My financial advisor, Tom, had tried to warn me 6 months earlier. "Margaret, at this rate, you'll have nothing left within a year," he'd said, his face serious across the desk. "These withdrawals, they're not sustainable." Tom had been managing my money since Robert died. He'd known Robert from their golf club days, and he'd promised to take care of me financially. I could see the frustration in his eyes every time I came in requesting another withdrawal. He'd pull up the charts, show me the projections, explain in the clearest terms possible that I was destroying my future. "Look at this," he'd said, pointing to a graph that showed my account balance plummeting like a ski slope. "In 2019, you had $214,000. That was a comfortable retirement, Margaret. Now you're down to $41,000. Do you understand what that means?" I understood. I just didn't care enough about my future to prioritize it over my daughter's present. Or so I told myself. But I'd waved him off. Family comes first. That's what I told him. That's what I told myself every time I transferred another $1,000 to Julia's account. I wish I could tell you there was one big moment that opened my eyes, one dramatic revelation that made everything clear. But that's not how it works, is it? It was more like water wearing away stone. Little things that accumulated until the foundation cracked. It started with the receipts. I'd been cleaning out my car, trying to find my insurance paperwork, when I found a crumpled receipt tucked under the passenger seat. It was from a high-end baby boutique in Scottsdale, the kind of place where a crib costs more than most people's monthly rent. The date was from 2 months ago, and the total made my stomach drop. $4,000 for nursery furniture. I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, the receipt trembling in my hands, reading it over and over like the numbers might change if I looked hard enough. $4,000. $4,000. That was more than 3 months of my Social Security check. That was the amount I'd told Tom I couldn't afford to keep in my emergency fund. The itemization told the whole story. One convertible crib in antique white, $899. One matching dresser with changing tabletop, $1,200. One glider rocking chair with ottoman, $750. Custom bedding set, $429, and on, each line item a small knife to my heart. I stared at that receipt for a long time, my hands shaking. Julia had told me she was buying everything secondhand this time, being budget conscious. That's why she'd needed the $2,000 I'd sent her last month, supposedly for bills and groceries. But here was proof, printed in black and white, that she'd spent double that amount on a luxury crib I'd never even seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the air conditioner hum and rattle. In my mind, I kept adding up all the money I'd given her over the years. Rough estimates at first, but then I got up at 2 a.m. and started going through my bank statements with a flashlight at the kitchen table, too worked up to turn on the overhead light. The kitchen was dark except for the circle of light from my flashlight. I spread the statements out chronologically, going back 3 years because that's how long I kept physical copies. Before that, I'd have to log into online banking, and I wasn't sure I was ready to see the full scope of the damage. Even just 3 years was devastating. I made a list in a notebook, my handwriting shaky in the dim light. January 2021, $1, $200 for car repairs. February 2021, $800 for emergency medical bills. March 2021, $2,000 for mortgage when Derek lost his job. April 2021, $500 for Derek's new job wardrobe. May 2021, $600 for Julia's birthday trip. And on, month after month, an endless stream of emergencies and necessities that I'd funded without question. Some months it was just a few $100s. Other months, it was several thousand. But it never stopped. Not once in 3 years had there been a month where Julia didn't need something from me. The number made me nauseous. $34,000. That's what I'd given her in just the last 3 years. And that didn't count all the times before. All the smaller amounts that hadn't seemed significant at the time, but had added up to probably double that. My friend Karen from book club, the one I'd stopped seeing regularly, she'd mentioned something once about financial abuse. We'd been reading this memoir about a woman who'd been exploited by her family, and Karen had said, "You know, Margaret, This reminds me of... But she'd trailed off, and I'd changed the subject because I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't ready to hear it. Now, sitting in my dark kitchen with those bank statements spread out in front of me, I was ready. I was more than ready. I was desperate to understand how I'd let this happen. The next morning, I drove over to Julia's house unannounced. I never did that, never just showed up, because she'd made it clear she didn't like surprises. But I had that receipt in my purse and I needed answers. The drive over felt surreal. Phoenix traffic rushed around me, people going about their normal lives while mine was crumbling. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, rehearsing what I'd say. But every script I imagined sounded either too aggressive or too weak, too angry or too apologetic. Derek answered the door, and I could see the panic flash across his face before he covered it with that familiar smile. "Margaret, hey, we weren't expecting you." "I know. Is Julia home?" Derek hesitated, glancing over his shoulder like he was calculating whether he could lie to me. The kids were making noise somewhere deeper in the house, a crash followed by crying, and he winced. "She's in the nursery. I'll let her know you're here. Don't bother. I know the way." I brushed past him, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The new nursery was where the old guest room used to be, the one I'd stayed in when I came to help after each baby was born. Apparently, my services were no longer needed enough to warrant keeping a space for me. She was in the nursery, the new one, the one with the $4,000 crib. It was beautiful, I'll give her that. Everything coordinated, everything perfect. Everything paid for with my money while she'd told me they were struggling. The walls were painted a soft sage green, with hand-painted botanical murals that must have cost hundreds more. There was a professional-looking gallery wall of framed prints, each in a matching white frame. A plush area rug that probably cost more than my monthly water bill covered the hardwood floor. The glider chair sat in the corner by the window, positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Julia looked annoyed, her hand resting on her growing belly in that protective way pregnant women do. I pulled out the receipt, my hand steadier than I expected. "Want to explain this?" The color drained from her face, and in that moment, I saw her for what she was. Not my little girl, not the daughter I'd raised to be honest and kind, but a stranger who'd learned that Mom was an ATM machine that never said no. "Where did you find that?" Not an explanation, not an apology, just anger that I'd discovered her lie. "Does it matter? You told me you were buying secondhand. You told me you needed money for essentials, but here you are. Spending thousands on luxury furniture while I'm eating ramen noodles to make my Social Security check stretch." Julia's face hardened, her jaw setting in that stubborn way she'd had since she was a toddler. "You don't understand," she started, and I recognized that tone, the one she'd used 100 times before, the one that usually made me back down and apologize for questioning her. "Then explain it to me. Explain how you're struggling so much you need my rent money, but you can afford to drop $4,000 at a boutique in Scottsdale. Explain how Derek can't keep a job but drives a BMW. Explain how your kids have everything while I can't afford to replace my broken dishwasher." "We have appearances to maintain," she snapped, and then immediately looked like she regretted the honesty. "Derek's industry. It's about image. We have to look successful to be successful." "Appearances. You've been bankrupting me for appearances." But something was different this time. Maybe it was the sleepless night, or the bank statement still sitting on my kitchen table, or just the accumulated weight of 7 years of being used. Whatever it was, I felt it settle in my chest like concrete. "No, Julia, you don't understand. This stops. Today." She laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, come on, Mom. Don't be dramatic. You'll cool off and everything will go back to normal. It always does." And that's when I knew. She'd said the quiet part out loud, revealed the game we'd both been playing. She manipulated, I enabled, and we both pretended it was love. Normal? Julia, there's nothing normal about what we've been doing. Normal daughters don't bleed their mothers dry. Normal mothers don't sacrifice their entire future for children who don't even appreciate it. Don't appreciate it? Her voice rose, sharp and defensive. I've given you grandchildren. I've let you be part of their lives. Some grandmothers never even see their grandkids. Let me? You've been using them as leverage. Help me or you won't see the kids. Buy this or you're a bad grandmother. I'm done, Julia. I'm done being manipulated. I'm done being your personal bank. I left without another word, got in my car, drove home, and sat on my porch swing for 3 hours, just processing. The lemon tree rustled in the hot breeze, and I thought about all those years of trying to keep something alive that should have been allowed to struggle on its own. The porch swing creaked rhythmically as I rocked, a sound I'd heard thousands of times but never really listened to. Robert had hung this swing 25 years ago, and we'd spent countless evenings here talking about our day, planning our future, dreaming about grandchildren. He'd imagined something so different from this reality. He'd imagined happy family gatherings, not this toxic manipulation disguised as need. I wondered what he would think if he could see me now. Would he be disappointed in how I'd let Julia take advantage? Or would he have fallen into the same trap, unable to say no to his little girl? Robert had always been softer with Julia than with the other kids. She was his firstborn, and there was something special about that bond. I remembered when she was 5 years old, crying because she wanted a bike like her friend's expensive pink cruiser. We couldn't afford it at the time, not really, but Robert had worked overtime for 2 weeks straight to buy it for her. The joy on her face when she saw it on her birthday morning. I can still picture it perfectly. Maybe that's when it started. Maybe we taught her that if she wanted something badly enough, someone would always swoop in to provide it. We thought we were teaching her that she was loved, that she was worthy, that her happiness mattered. We didn't realize we were teaching her that she didn't have to work for things, didn't have to sacrifice or save or earn. We were teaching her that her desires were more important than anyone else's needs. I sat there on that swing, watching the sun set over the Phoenix skyline, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. The city looked beautiful from my porch, peaceful. Inside me, though, there was no peace. Just this churning mixture of grief and anger, and something that felt uncomfortably close to relief. That evening, Julia called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again, and again. By the 10th call, I turned my phone off completely. The next few weeks were harder than I expected. Not because I missed her, but because I missed the version of her I'd created in my head. The grateful daughter, the struggling young mother who just needed a little help. That version had never existed, and grieving her felt like mourning someone who died. But I wasn't completely alone. Remember Karen from book club? She called me one evening, said she'd heard through the grapevine that Julia and I had had some kind of falling out. In a small community like ours, word travels fast. "I've been where you are," Karen said, her voice warm through the phone. Not the exact situation, but close enough. My son and his wife, they did something similar. Took me for everything I had before I finally woke up. We met for coffee the next day at that little place downtown with the good air conditioning and the mediocre pastries. Karen brought documents, resources, contact information for a lawyer who specialized in elder financial abuse. "Wait," I said, pushing the papers back across the table. "Elder abuse? I'm not being abused. She's just taking advantage a little." Karen's smile was sad and knowing. "Honey, that's exactly what abuse looks like. It starts small, with someone you trust, and before you know it, you're making excuses for them while they drain you dry." She pulled out a pamphlet and pointed to a checklist of warning signs. I felt sick as I recognized almost every single one. Isolating you from other relationships, constant financial crises that never resolve, escalating requests for money, Guilt trips when you try to say no, secrecy about their actual financial situation. I looked at each item on that list and memories flooded back. Times Julia had discouraged me from spending money on myself. "Do you really need that, Mom? It seems wasteful." Times she'd convinced me to skip events with friends because she needed babysitting. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, Mom. You know how hard things are for us right now." The isolation had been so gradual, so subtle, that I hadn't even noticed it happening. My world had slowly shrunk until it revolved almost entirely around Julia and her needs. My friends had stopped calling as often because I was always canceling plans. My hobbies had fallen away because I didn't have the time or money to pursue them. Even my other children had become more distant, perhaps sensing that I had nothing left to give them because Julia had taken it all. Victims of financial elder abuse lose an average of $30,000, Karen said gently. "You're right at that average, Margaret. Your textbook." The word victim hit me like a physical blow. I'd never thought of myself that way. Victims were other people, people in situations more dramatic than mine. Victims were beaten or stolen from, or obviously manipulated. They weren't mothers who'd chosen to help their daughters. Except, had I really chosen? Or had I been systematically conditioned over years to believe I had no choice? The statistics she shared made my head spin. Experts estimate that 1 in 10 Americans over 60 experiences some form of elder abuse, and financial exploitation is the most common type. I was one of them, sitting in a coffee shop in Phoenix, trying to wrap my head around the idea that my own daughter was my abuser. Karen helped me understand something crucial that day. Victims of this kind of abuse try to leave, on average, 7 times before they finally succeed. 7 times. I thought about all the times I'd put my foot down with Julia over the years, only to cave when she cried or guilt-tripped me or played the grandchildren card. All those failed attempts at boundaries weren't weakness. They were practice for this moment, this final break. That night, I started planning my exit strategy in earnest. Not leaving Phoenix, not abandoning my family, but extracting myself from this cycle of exploitation. I made an appointment with Tom, my financial advisor, and together we created a new account that Julia couldn't access. We set up automatic transfers from my Social Security check, putting money away before I could even think about giving it to her. I met with the lawyer Karen had recommended, a sharp woman in her 50s named Patricia who'd heard it all before. "The good news is, you caught it before they completely destroyed you financially," Patricia said, reviewing my bank statements. "The bad news is, rebuilding will take years." We discussed options, legal action, restraining orders, formal cease and desist letters. Part of me wanted to go nuclear, to make Julia face real consequences for what she'd done. But another part, the part that was still her mother, wanted something quieter, something that would protect me without completely destroying her. In the end, we drafted a formal letter outlining that all financial support would cease immediately and any further requests would be considered harassment. Patricia advised me to document everything, every text, every call, every manipulation attempt, just in case. Julia didn't take it well. The texts started coming fast and furious the day she received the letter. Anger at first, calling me selfish and cruel. Then guilt trips about the grandchildren. How could I abandon them? What kind of grandmother was I? Then tears, promises to change, swearing this time would be different. I blocked her number. I know that sounds harsh, but Patricia had warned me this would happen. Love bombing, she called it. A classic manipulation tactic. My other 3 kids got involved, of course. My son called, concerned about the family drama. My middle daughter sided with Julia, said I was being unreasonable. Only my youngest, Amy, seemed to understand. "Mom, I've been trying to tell you for years that Julia was using you," Amy said. "I'm glad you finally see it." That conversation with Amy opened a door I'd been keeping firmly shut. She told me about times she'd tried to warn me, gentle hints I'd dismissed or outright ignored. About family gatherings where my other children had whispered among themselves, wondering when I'd finally wake up. About Julia bragging to her siblings about how easy it was to get money from me, how she just had to cry a little or mention the grandkids and I'd cave. She literally called you her personal ATM once, Amy said, her voice tight with anger. At Thanksgiving 3 years ago, when you were in the kitchen. She was laughing about it with Derek. I confronted her, told her she was being horrible, and she just shrugged, said you were happy to help, that it made you feel needed. The words burned. I remembered that Thanksgiving, how grateful Julia had seemed when I'd given her $1,500 for Christmas presents for the kids. I'd felt good about it, felt like I was making their holiday special. The whole time, she'd been mocking me in the next room. Apparently, they'd all known. All 3 of my other children had watched Julia bleed me dry and said nothing, either because they didn't want to get involved or because, I suspect, they were benefiting from the distraction. As long as I was focused on Julia, I wasn't noticing the smaller amounts they were borrowing. But Amy had tried, in her own way. She'd suggested books about boundaries. She'd invited me to therapy with her once, saying she wanted support for family issues. I'd declined, thinking she was being dramatic. Now I understood she'd been throwing me a lifeline, and I'd been too deep in denial to grab it. That realization stung worse than Julia's betrayal somehow. The idea that my whole family had been complicit, that I'd been the only one who didn't see what was happening. But worse than that was knowing that someone had tried to save me, and I'd refused to be saved. Friday nights had been our tradition, Julia and me. We'd bake cookies together, her kids running around my kitchen, flour everywhere, laughter and chaos. The first Friday after I cut her off, I sat alone in that kitchen, the mixing bowls clean and put away, the silence almost suffocating. I walked over to the pantry where I kept my baking supplies. The chocolate chips I'd bought on sale specifically for our Friday tradition sat unopened on the shelf. The special cookie cutters Julia's kids loved, shaped like dinosaurs and princesses, hung from their hooks. I'd created this whole ritual around making my daughter happy, around being the fun grandmother, the helpful mother. And now it was gone. The grief hit me in waves. I found myself crying over those cookie cutters, over the silence where children's laughter used to be, over the loss of a relationship I'd cherished, even as it destroyed me. This is what makes family financial abuse so insidious. I realized, you're not just losing money. You're losing the relationship itself, losing the version of your family member you thought you knew, losing the future you'd imagined together. But I didn't call her. I didn't break. Instead, I called Karen. We started a new tradition, Friday night dinners at different restaurants around Phoenix. She introduced me to other women like us, survivors of family financial abuse who'd found each other and formed their own kind of family. That first Friday dinner, I was nervous. What would we even talk about? Would it just be hours of sharing horror stories, comparing wounds? But it wasn't like that at all. Yes, we talked about our experiences, but we also laughed. We talked about our lives, our dreams, the things we were doing now that we'd reclaimed our finances and our freedom. One woman, Rosa, had taken up painting classes at the community center. Another, Diane, had finally gone on that European river cruise she'd been dreaming about for a decade. These women weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And for the first time in years, I thought maybe I could thrive too. There was Linda, whose daughter-in-law had forged her signature on loan documents. There was Patricia, different from my lawyer, whose son had stolen her identity and destroyed her credit. There was Maureen, who'd lost her house to her grandson's gambling addiction. Listening to their stories, I felt less alone, but I also felt angry. Angry at a system that makes it so easy for family members to exploit their elders. Angry at a culture that tells us family always comes first, even when family is destroying us. 2 months after I cut Julia off, she showed up at my house. 8 months pregnant, tears streaming down her face, standing on my porch in the afternoon heat. "Please, Mom, I'm sorry. I need you." Every fiber of my being wanted to open that door, to pull her inside, to fix whatever was broken. That's the thing about being a mother. The instinct to nurture doesn't just turn off because someone hurt you. But I'd learned something in those 2 months. I'd learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enabling. It's slow suicide. I spoke through the screen door, my hand on the lock to keep myself from opening it. "Julia, I love you. I will always love you. But I can't help you anymore. Not like this. You need to figure this out on your own." "But the baby," she sobbed. "What about the baby? What about the 4 children you already have? The ones you've been using to manipulate me for years? You'll figure it out. You're resourceful when you want to be." She left, got in her car and drove away, and I stood at that screen door for a long time afterward, my heart breaking and healing simultaneously. The breaking point came a week later. My sister, who lives in Tucson, called me with news that had filtered through the family grapevine. Julia and Derek were throwing a gender reveal party, a big one, with a rented venue and a catering company and a photographer. "How can they afford that?" my sister asked. "I thought they were broke." So did I. But clearly, the money had always been there. They'd just preferred to use mine and keep theirs for fun things like parties and new cars and luxury cribs. I hung up the phone and felt something shift inside me. The last remnants of guilt, the lingering questions about whether I was being too harsh, they evaporated like water on Phoenix pavement in July. They'd never needed my money. They'd wanted it because it was easier than budgeting their own. They'd wanted it because I'd made it easy, trained them to expect it, rewarded their manipulation with unconditional support. But that version of me was gone, dead and buried alongside the illusion of the perfect family I'd been trying to maintain. I decided it was time for a confrontation. Not the angry, emotional kind Julia probably expected. No, this needed to be surgical, precise, in front of witnesses so there could be no rewriting of history later. The gender reveal party was being held at a community center Julia's church rented out for events. I hadn't been invited, naturally, but I showed up anyway. Karen came with me for moral support, and we walked in right as they were about to cut the cake. The room went silent when people saw me. Julia's face went white, then red. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Julia's voice was shaking, but I couldn't tell if it was from anger or fear. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. "In front of everyone, so there's no confusion later about what was said." Her friends and family members shifted uncomfortably. Some of them knew the situation. Others were about to get an education. I pulled out my phone, where I documented everything. Every request for money, every manipulation, every lie. I'd even included the receipt for that $4,000 crib. "For 7 years," I started, my voice clear and strong. "I've been funding your lifestyle, not helping you through hard times. Funding your choices to live beyond your means while claiming poverty. $34,000 in the last 3 years alone. That's the average amount victims of financial elder abuse lose. Did you know that? I read that statistic and realized I was textbook." Julia tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "I'm not done. You've guilt-tripped me, manipulated me, used my grandchildren as leverage to extract money you never needed. Money you spent on luxuries while I ate ramen and canceled my own life. And the worst part? I let you. I enabled every bit of it because I believed the lie that this was what mothers do." The room was dead silent. Someone's phone was recording. Good. Let them record it. Let everyone see the truth. "But here's what's going to happen now," I continued. "I've established legal boundaries. Any further contact requesting money will be documented and potentially used in court. I've protected my assets. I've surrounded myself with people who actually care about me, not my bank account, and I'm done feeling guilty about it. Julia's face crumpled, and this time I knew it was real, because it was ugly. Not the pretty crying she did when she wanted something, but the messy, snotty kind that comes from actual emotion. "I'm your daughter," she choked out, "and I'm your mother. But that doesn't mean you own me. That doesn't mean you get to use me up and throw me away. I love you, Julia, but I love myself more now, and that's something I should have learned a long time ago." I turned and walked out, Karen beside me. Behind us, the party dissolved into chaos. People were talking, arguing, demanding explanations. Derek was trying to calm Julia down. Someone's child was crying, but I didn't look back. I'd said what needed to be said, and now it was done. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My phone exploded with messages from family members, most of them angry. How dare I embarrass Julia like that? How dare I ruin her special day? How dare I air our dirty laundry in public? Only Amy texted something different. "About damn time, Mom. Proud of you." Patricia, my lawyer, called that evening to tell me that the recording had already gone viral in local Facebook groups. Apparently, I'd struck a nerve. Dozens of people were reaching out, sharing their own stories of family financial abuse, thanking me for speaking up. "You might have just started a movement," Patricia said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Julia went into labor 2 weeks later. Amy called to tell me, asked if I wanted to go to the hospital. "No," I said, and it was the hardest word I'd ever spoken. "I need to stay away, for both of us." "She's asking for you," Amy said gently. "She'll survive. She's got Derek and her church friends and apparently enough money for catering and photographers. She doesn't need me. She never did. She wanted me. And there's a difference." The baby was born healthy, a girl. They named her Margaret, which felt like one last manipulation, one last attempt to pull me back in. It didn't work. Instead, I threw myself into a new project. With Karen's help, I started a support group for victims of family financial abuse. We met weekly at the library, a dozen of us at first, then 20, then 40. People who'd been exploited by their children, their grandchildren, their siblings. We shared resources, legal advice, coping strategies. We validated each other's experiences, reminded each other that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was survival. I testified at a city council meeting about the need for better protections for vulnerable adults. I spoke at senior centers, telling my story, warning others not to make the same mistakes I did. The first time I spoke publicly, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold my notes. I stood at the podium in front of 30 senior citizens at the rec center, my voice wavering as I introduced myself. "My name is Margaret, and my daughter financially abused me for 7 years." Saying it out loud, in front of strangers, felt both terrifying and liberating. I watched their faces as I told my story. Some nodded in recognition, clearly seeing their own situations reflected in mine. Others looked shocked, perhaps realizing for the first time that what was happening to them had a name. A few cried quietly, and I knew those tears. I'd cried them myself, alone in my kitchen at 2 a.m. After I finished speaking, an elderly woman approached me. Her name was Helen, and she was 82 years old. With trembling hands, she showed me her bank statements. Her grandson had been taking money from her for 5 years, supposedly to pay for college, but she'd just discovered he'd dropped out 3 years ago and was using her money to fund a drug habit. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. "I thought something was wrong with me, that I was a bad grandmother for even questioning it." I held her hands and told her what I needed to hear back then. "You're not alone. You're not bad. You're being abused, and it's not your fault." That night, Helen joined our support group. So did 3 other women from that talk. Our tribe was growing, and with it, my sense of purpose. Maybe all of this pain could lead to something meaningful. Maybe I could help others avoid the years of suffering I'd endured. The local news picked it up, a human interest story about the grandmother who'd gone public with her daughter's financial abuse. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica, came to my house for the interview. She sat on my porch swing, the same swing where I'd processed so much of my pain, and she asked thoughtful questions that showed she understood this wasn't just about money. The reporter asked if I had any regrets. Only that I didn't do it sooner, I told her. Every day I waited was another day of freedom I lost, another dollar I gave away, another piece of myself I sacrificed on the altar of maternal guilt. 6 months after the confrontation, Julia sent a letter. Not a text, not an email, but an actual handwritten letter delivered through the mail. In it, she apologized. Really apologized, not the fake kind designed to manipulate me back into her life. I sat at my kitchen table, holding that envelope for 10 minutes before I could bring myself to open it. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding. Part of me was terrified it would be another manipulation, another attempt to pull me back in. Part of me was terrified it would be genuine, because what would I do with that? The letter was 3 pages long, written in Julia's distinctive handwriting, the same handwriting I'd seen on school projects and birthday cards and grocery lists left on my counter. But the words were different from any she'd ever written to me before. "Mom," it began. "I don't know if you'll even read this, and I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away. But I need to say these things, even if you never hear them. I owe you that much, and so much more." She went on to detail how hitting rock bottom after I cut her off had forced her to face herself. How she'd had to get a job, for the first time since before Jake was born, working night shifts at a grocery store while Derek watched the kids. How they'd had to sell the BMW and buy a used minivan. How they'd downgraded their lifestyle in every way. And how difficult it had been at first. But then she wrote something that made me cry. "The strangest thing happened, Mom." As our bank account got smaller, as we learned to budget and sacrifice and actually work for what we have, I felt happier. Not right away. At first I just felt angry and sorry for myself, but slowly I started feeling proud. Proud of myself for earning things, for taking care of my family with my own hands instead of your money. For the first time in my adult life, I feel like a grown-up instead of a child playing house with someone else's credit card. She was in therapy, she wrote, learning about her own patterns, her own issues with entitlement and manipulation. Derek had gotten a steady job, and they were budgeting properly for the first time in their marriage. The baby was thriving, the other kids were adjusting. She wrote about seeing me on the news, about how proud she was, even through her shame, about how seeing me help other people had made her realize the depth of what she'd done to me. "You were always strong, Mom, but I kept you small. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She didn't ask for money, didn't ask for anything really, except my forgiveness when I was ready. I read that letter 5 times that day, looking for manipulation, for hidden requests, for any sign that this was another game, but I couldn't find any. It seemed genuine, raw, real. I wrote back 3 weeks later, told her I forgave her, but forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, not yet, maybe not ever. That I needed her to respect my boundaries, to understand that our relationship, if we rebuilt it, would look different from before. She wrote back agreeing to my terms. We've been corresponding through letters ever since, slow and careful, like 2 strangers learning to trust each other. I've seen the baby once from a distance, at Amy's house. Julia brought her over for a family gathering I'd agreed to attend with strict conditions. No requests for money, no manipulation, no using the grandchildren as leverage. It was awkward and painful and necessary. We sat on opposite sides of the room, making small talk, both of us careful not to cross invisible lines. But you know what? I survived it. More than that, I thrived. My retirement account is slowly rebuilding. I go on small trips now, day drives to Sedona, weekend visits to Tucson. I bought myself a new dress for the first time in 5 years, something that wasn't on sale just because I liked it. I'm learning what it means to put myself first, to value my own peace over everyone else's comfort. It's harder than it sounds, unlearning 63 years of conditioning that taught me a good mother sacrifices everything. The support group has become my new family. We celebrate each other's victories, mourn each other's setbacks. When Linda's son tried to manipulate his way back into her life, we surrounded her, reminded her of her strength. When Patricia's grandson actually got help for his gambling addiction and made genuine amends, we celebrated with champagne and chocolate cake. We're a tribe of survivors, warriors who fought battles in our own living rooms and kitchens, who've learned that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we love the best. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. Something I wish someone had told me years ago before I'd lost so much time and money and peace. Financial exploitation by family members is one of the fastest growing forms of elder abuse in this country. But it's also one of the least reported. You want to know why? Shame. Victims feel ashamed that their own family would hurt them. They feel ashamed that they didn't see it coming, didn't stop it sooner. But here's what I learned, and what I want you to understand. The shame doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the people who chose manipulation over integrity, who chose their wants over our needs. If you're reading this and something in my story sounds familiar, if you're making excuses for a family member who constantly needs financial help, if you're sacrificing your own security to fund someone else's lifestyle, please listen. This is not normal. This is not what love looks like. Real love respects boundaries. Real love doesn't drain you dry and then blame you for being empty. Here are the warning signs I wish I'd recognized earlier. Constant financial crises that never seem to resolve despite your help. Requests that escalate in amount and frequency. Guilt trips when you try to say no. Secrecy about how they're spending the money you give them. Isolation from other family members or friends who might question the dynamic. If you're experiencing these things, you're not alone. There are resources available. Elder law attorneys who specialize in financial abuse, support groups like the one we started, government agencies that investigate these cases. But the first step, the hardest step, is admitting it's happening. Calling it what it is: abuse, not helping, not supporting, not being a good parent or grandparent. Abuse. And once you name it, you can begin to heal from it. I've also learned about something called financial coercive control. It's when someone uses money to trap you, to make you dependent, to limit your freedom. My situation was almost the reverse. Julia using me as her unlimited ATM, but the principle is the same. Money being weaponized to maintain an unhealthy power dynamic. Studies show that 60 to 80% of domestic abuse cases involve some form of financial control. That's staggering when you think about it. Money isn't just money. It's power, freedom, security. When someone manipulates or controls your finances, they're manipulating or controlling your life. I want you to know that if you set boundaries and your family member reacts with rage, guilt trips, or accusations, that's actually confirmation you made the right choice. Healthy people respect boundaries. Manipulators fight them. And if you're worried about what other people will think, remember this. The people who matter will understand. The people who don't understand don't matter. My extended family's judgment meant nothing compared to my peace of mind. One more thing. Document everything. I cannot stress this enough. Save texts, emails, bank statements. Keep a journal of requests and your responses. If you ever need legal protection, these records will be crucial. And please, please talk to someone. A therapist, a financial advisor, a lawyer, a friend. Isolation is what allows this abuse to continue. Breaking the silence is how we break the cycle. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I know this was a lot, and maybe parts of it were hard to hear. But if my story helps even one person recognize what's happening to them and take steps to protect themselves, then going public was worth it. I want to know where you're listening from, what time it is in your part of the world. Are you having your morning coffee? Or is it late at night and you can't sleep? Drop your city and the time in the comments. I love knowing this story is reaching people everywhere. And if this resonated with you, if you've been through something similar or you're going through it now, hit that like button. Let me know I'm not alone in this. Let's build a community of survivors who refuse to be victims anymore. What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted Julia publicly or handled it differently? I genuinely want to know. Your perspective might help someone else who's facing this decision. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. Real stories from real people who've survived impossible situations and came out stronger on the other side. I've got 2 other videos I think you'll find interesting. One is about Linda's story, how she protected herself from her son's identity theft. The other is about setting boundaries with adult children without guilt. Both are linked below. Until the next story, take care of your heart, protect your peace, and remember, saying no to someone else's manipulation is saying yes to your own freedom. This is Margaret, signing off from Phoenix, where it's currently 78 degrees and I'm sitting on my porch swing, drinking lemonade from my stubborn lemon tree, finally at peace.